Welcome, everyone. I'm Carol Fitzgerald from Reading Group Guides, a website from the Book Report Network, and the host of the Book Reporter Talks to Video podcast series. And I want to welcome you all to our Bookaccino Live book group event, where our guest this evening is Amanda Peters, and we're going to be discussing her national best-selling novel, The Berry Pickers, which won the 2023 Barnes& Noble Discover Prize, which is huge, and the Andrew Carnegie Mellon for Excellence in Fiction. And I've been at that event many times at ALA, and it's a really, really prestigious night to be able to go up and win that award. So congratulations to her. Our reviewer, Jane Krebs, had this to say about it. Spot on perfect. That's how I describe The Berry Pickers. Amanda Peters has created a rich and layered mystery. Watching Joe and Norma unravel the past and piece together their lives certainly qualifies as a gripping read. It also was one of my Book Reporter Bets On selections last year. And as I say, today it went on sale in paperback. So we can say we're celebrating the paperback along with Amanda today. The format for tonight is going to be as follows. Let me start by saying that we are assuming that everyone here has read the book, okay? We're going to be talking spoilers. If you haven't read the book, close your ears because that's what's going to be happening. I'm going to begin with a discussion with Amanda, and then two of our readers will be joining us on screen live to talk about the Berry Pickers. And then I'm going to ask a question for one of the camera shy people who submitted a question in advance. And then we're going to go to questions from the audience. So if you have a question for Amanda, please drop it into the Q&A section where our intrepid editorial director, Tom Donadio, will be going to look for questions later on. So Q&A is where you put your questions in the chat. Just jump on and tell us who you are and where you're from. And with that housekeeping behind us, I'd like to welcome Amanda to the stage.
Hello.
Hi, Amanda. So good to see you again.
Oh, thank you. It's
And
so
you've
good
had
to be here.
so much more success. I am so happy for you. I mean, the Andrew Carnegie Mellon, the Barnes& and Noble Prize, amazing.
Yeah, kind of crazy, really. I'm still waiting for someone to like wake me up.
I know we were like so excited when we were like, wait a second, this is our paperback, paperback coming out day. This is all like, one fabulous thing after the other. So we're going to go back in time and talk about the book then from people who have read it but haven't had a chance to hear from you before. So let's start with what was the genesis of the storyline? How did this story get developed?
Yeah, I love this story just because it's me and my dad. I've grown up with these stories of the berry pickers from my dad. My dad was a Mi'kmaq berry picker in the 60s and 70s. So my grandparents would load up the entire family, whichever kids were home at the time, because my dad is 10 of 14, and they would go to the berry fields of Maine and they would pick blueberries during the summer, usually like mid-July to mid-September, and they would save the money for winter and they would use the money for school supplies. My dad's still bitter about that. He's almost 70. So yeah, so they would do that. So I've just grown up with these stories. So when I started writing, my dad was like, "You should write about the berry pickers." I said, "No, Dad, I write fiction, not nonfiction." And he's like, "I still think you should write about the berry pickers." So he took me down to Maine in August or July. I can't quite remember because I'm getting old. In 2017, and showed me the berry fields. And he was like, "This is where your grandfather would do this, and this is where the camps were, and this is where we would go for a swim." And just when I was down there, I was like, "Okay, I guess there's a story here." And that first line of chapter one, the day that Ruthie went missing, that was sparked down there. And I was like, "Okay, here we go."
Here we go. What was it
Mm.
like standing on the land where they had, done this, where they had spent all these summers?
It was kind of strange because I could kind of visualize it. Like I have pictures of my dad when he was little, and I can visualize him and he's quite close to two of my uncles. So I can picture the three of them like running around, and I can picture my nan in the background. I can picture my grandpa, like he was a hard worker. My grandpa worked with his hands his whole life. I can just kind of I could see it all for the first time. And it was just kind of like, okay, this is my family history. Now the book is fiction.
Yes.
Book is fiction, but it was inspired by those stories from my dad.
So when you were there, are people still picking in those berry fields? Are the berry fields still?
Yeah, yeah. So it's a big thing in northern Maine. They call it the Barrens up near Machias and Cherryfield and along Route 9, the airline route, as anybody who's traveled it knows it as. So it's still a big deal. The Mi'kmaq aren't as populous now in the summers, but I know Mi'kmaq people who still go in the summer to
Wow.
pick berries just to keep that tradition alive. And it's backbreaking work. Like, my goodness, it's not my not my thing. I like to read a book and that's my relaxation, but they go down there and they do that. So
Yep. I mean, berries are tiny. It's not like you're picking apples or peaches. I mean,
yeah.
picture children's hands would be easy to be able to pull a blueberry, but it's not, it's still
Well, they did
backbreaking
have
work.
rakes. They had rakes. So we went actually when my dad was down there, we went to this antique shop and he found one of the rakes. He's like, "This is the rakes that we used to use." So it was kind of cool to see it. But it's still, I asked my dad, I was like, what is the like the most intense memory you have from the berry fields? And he said that it was the sun on the back of his neck and
Wow.
just that heat and just being like really hot and because they all worked even regardless of age everybody had a part to play so it's just kind of fun.
Did you say your father came from a family of 10?
No, he was 10 of 14.
10 or 14. Oh, okay.
Yeah. So 14 children, yep.
So
Yeah,
everybody
right.
gets packed in the car pretty tightly to go down and do this if you're a picking age.
Yeah, they had a truck with one of the, the old trucks with the wooden sides on the back, and they
Yes.
had a canvas thing over the top. And my dad tells a story with a canvas roof where there was a forest fire when they were heading to Maine, and like the ashes were hitting the roof. Yeah, so there's just a wealth of stories there that I could just like jump into and be inspired by.
And how many years did he spend doing that? Does he like was he till he was a teenager or
I think so. I think so. He just says the late 60s, early 70s,
okay.
and my grandpa switched jobs, and he didn't do that anymore. But yeah, so they spend a good amount of time down there.
Wow. So did you grow up in part as part of the indigenous culture, or was this something that was a big part of your life or not as you were young?
Not really. I mean, colonization has done its thing here in Canada and the US, where a lot of us are not connected to our culture. And I was raised predominantly by my mom. My dad was always a part of my life, a big part of my life, but I was raised, and my mom is not Indigenous. So I didn't really participate in, I don't speak the language. I didn't participate in like ceremony and all that kind of stuff. So this is kind of way, this book was actually my way of reconnecting
Wow.
with my culture, along with my jobs, because I've worked in Indigenous governance, administration, financial management since 2009. So being in that world, plus writing this book, has kind of like allowed me to become the Mi'kmaq woman I kind of wanted to be.
Yeah. What has the reaction been from people from the community who are, their stories being told?
Yeah, that so I did have about a year ago now, which seems so strange that it's been that long. I had a book club with a woman's group from Eskasoni First Nation here in Cape Breton in Nova Scotia. And they loved the book and they said we feel seen, we feel represented. And I felt really, really good about that. I was like, oh, that was kind of like a super proud moment for me when the and in the US, I know that a lot of people are like, we've never even heard of the Mi'kmaq.
Right.
So we're kind of like on the scene now. People are realizing that we're still here. 60,000 of us still exist and we're still going strong. So it's just really, really I don't know, it just does my heart good
Yeah.
when I hear that the Mi'kmaq people, and that, to be honest though, if they didn't like it, they're probably not going to tell me to my face.
It's all you're gonna get thrown off the reservation. It's like, okay, let's still let her on. It's all right,
So
literally.
I really appreciate it when, and I get a lot of now Mi'kmaq people when they read the book, they
Mhm.
will say to me, friends of mine, stuff, "Oh, you should hear my story from the berry pickers." So there's a lot of true stories from the berry fields that people want to tell. So it's kind of fun.
Yeah. So for you, it's like, wait a second, I wrote this book, but there are these other fabulous stories that I'm still continuing to hear. Another
Yeah.
question to you: when you were, have you worked with, spoken to a lot of book clubs over the past year, and what's that been like?
Oh, so many, so many. Yeah, during the winter months, it was like 3 or 4 a week doing a kind of Zoom thing. And the occasional one local. My very first book club was right here in Falmouth, Nova Scotia. But there's a little, it was my sister-in-law's book club, so I think they
Family's
invited me.
okay. Family counts. Family counts.
Yeah. So yeah, I've done so many book clubs. I do enjoy it, but sometimes I do get a little bit tired. But I do enjoy it because I love to see the people and I love to answer the questions. And I just can't believe that this many people have read my book. It's still, like I said, I'm still in shock.
Have you learned anything from people when you're meeting with a book club that you didn't see was in your writing or something like that? Because authors have often said to me, I didn't see that in the book, but yeah, that sounds really good.
Yeah, I've had a few of those. Every kind of like time I'm interviewed, I'm like, I did not think of that. The most interesting one was a woman came up to me here in Nova Scotia. I was doing a signing at Chapters, which is our Barnes and Noble here in Nova Scotia, and she said, "Do you think that June kept the secret because she wanted Lenore to keep her secret about her sexuality?" And I was like, no, wow, I never considered that. I was like, that is so interesting that because that's what this woman perceived. And I was
Right.
like, oh my goodness, that is interesting. So I do get those quite a bit, and I'm always a little bit excited because I'm a person who loves to read,
Hmm.
and I love books where I can think for myself.
Hmm.
Like I don't want everything laid out for me, like this happened, this happened, this happened. I want to be able to use my brain to conjure things and to use my imagination. So I'm very excited when people have a different perspective than me. Yeah, so it's kind of exciting.
It's like the way they perceive the character, the way they see something, and it's, what are you
Yeah, and then of
thinking?
course some people are like, I hate Joe. I was like, oh, that breaks my
Oh,
heart. And other people are like, I hate Aunt June. I'm like, yeah, but and so there are those conversations.
but it's good because it inspires emotion as opposed to just turning the pages. It's like I feel like I understand these characters, and whether I like them or not, I'm going to have an opinion because they were my
Yeah,
characters, you know?
that's so good because I know that I do read my Goodreads once in a while, not very
Mhm.
often, but sometimes I get on there and people are like, this is not a mystery. I was like, it was never intended to be a mystery. It's a character study. I want you to feel for these characters. I want you to understand their plight. I want you to understand that one tragic event can have a ripple effect for decades,
Hmm.
right? One event can affect people for 50 years into the future. That's what it was supposed to be about. It wasn't supposed to be a mystery at all. So I'm glad you said that. Thank you.
No, it's really interesting because sometimes I read, I don't go out to Goodreads that often, but I go out and read comics sometimes and I'm like, oh, did we read the same book? Like, is
Mm.
this the same book that I thought we were reading? And it's, I also love to read not only the fives, but the ones sometimes because I just
Oh,
want to see what they didn't enjoy. What did
yeah.
they not walk away from? So I think that's really, really
I
interesting.
have a good one. So this
Okay.
is a Canadian copy and it has the beveled edges
Yes.
on the I got a 1 star because she didn't like the beveled edges.
There are times that people get 1 star because the delivery was late or the
Oh
package was damaged and
yeah.
it has nothing to do. They should have like a different line for that. But it's interesting because people say, I don't like the deckled edges. I don't like this, which is a sign of quality. But it's very interesting that so many times people will say, oh, I don't like that about the book. And I'm like, but that's not the book. That's the
That's not the book.
packaging.
That's not the content. That's just the package. You're right. That's just the package it comes on,
Yeah.
right?
It's like I'm saying I don't like the cover, which means I don't like the book. Well, no, they're two different things. They're two different
Yeah,
things.
I just take those don't bother me at all. I'm just like, oh, that's hilarious.
But it's like, yeah, it's like you're seeing, wait, oh, that's what people think. Interesting,
Yeah.
interesting. I'm going to have Debbie, who's one of our longtime book group participants, join us now from Syracuse, New York. Debbie's, I think, has been with us on every one of these shows, and she always reads the books and has really insightful questions. So, Debbie, you're on.
Thanks, Carol. Hi, Amanda.
Hi.
Very nice to meet you. I loved your book. Very
Yeah.
interesting story. And resonated with me. I grew up in New England, and spent some summers in Maine, so uh, felt close to home. But I wanted to ask you, there seems to be a general theme of trauma in your book, both for the people actually involved in the event and certain incidents, as well as generational trauma. What was it about that topic that you wanted to explore?
Such an interesting question. I get this one a lot, but to be honest, I'm gonna be perfectly honest with you guys. When I sat down to write, I wasn't thinking I'm going to explore trauma. That wasn't my intent. My intent was to tell a good story. So I was like, I sat down at the computer and I was like, okay, my dad had convinced me that this might be a story. It's like, I want to tell a really good story. But I think that those things like the trauma and the grief, I prefer to refer to it as grief instead of trauma, that the grief are just a natural byproduct of my experiences. Now, not my personal experiences. I have been very fortunate that I haven't had, my dad did not go to residential school or those systems. But I have worked in First Nations health policy governance for years, and I've sat in circles. and I've listened to stories. And I had a residential school survivor sit in a circle while she told her story, and she held my hand while I cried. Like,
Um,
these are very strong, powerful people to have survived this, tell their stories and comfort the people who are hearing it for the first time. So I don't know if I sat down to write a book about trauma. I don't think I did. I sat down to tell a story that I thought people might be interested in, and a byproduct or a side effect, not like hives or anything, but you know what I mean? Like, a side effect is that I put these experiences that people had given to me into the book. Does
mhm,
that make sense?
mhm,
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. Another topic you seemed to explore was the concept of family
Hmm.
and what a family is. How do we define the family? Are we always searching for family? Because Ruthie always seemed to be searching for family. She knew
Yeah.
something was missing. And do you think that this concept or the importance of family differs based on the historical context of the particular group of people?
I don't think so, no. No, not at all. I think all families are, what's that quote? All families are messed up in their own unique way. So I think family is family regardless of culture or background. But what I wanted to show in the book was that a lot of people have very crazy stereotypes of Indigenous family, and but Indigenous families are big and they're loving and they're flawed and they're gracious towards one another. And I really wanted to bring out that joy and that love that they
Mhm.
have, because that's kind of my experience. Like, my nan and grandpa, they were the greatest to me. Like, my grandpa's name was Joe. So I just threw that in there to honor him. Like, I just wanted people to acknowledge that, while all families, I think, across cultures have similar experiences, a lot of time Indigenous families are pigeonholed into single mothers or alcoholic fathers. And no, it's not that way. We
Yeah,
have grateful families. So I think
yeah.
that's what I was trying to do.
You could certainly tell that with Joe and Ruthie. You know, their
Hmm.
relationship, even when they thought they had lost each other,
Yeah.
was so amazing.
Yeah.
Um, why did you choose to tell the story from primarily two different perspectives, Joe's perspective and Ruthie slash Norma's perspective? And whose story came to you first?
So, fun question. I feel like you may have Googled that before.
No, I
No?
didn't.
Oh, okay, that's cool then. So I originally had it outlined. It's just Joe's. It was just Joe. Ruthie was there in the first chapter. Ruthie came back in the last chapter. That was it. So I was going to follow Joe's progression through his life after this traumatic event, according to him. Now imagine that. Would have been a terrible, boring book. It probably never would have been published. But I was about 3 chapters in, and Joe's 2 or 3 chapters in. I can't quite remember. And I just had this nagging voice. Like, I want to tell my story. I want to tell my story. So I did the most terrifying thing that a writer can do. And I sat down in front of a completely blank screen. And I have an iMac, so it was a big blank screen. And I was like, I wonder if she has a story. And I just sat down and I was like, okay, I put my hands on the computer, said, tell me your story. And she did. Turns out she did have a story and she wanted to tell her story. So that's how that came about. But I couldn't write them at the same time because I wanted to make sure that Joe and Ruthie had very distinct voices because they had very different experiences, very different upbringings. So I actually wrote that time I wrote Ruthie's first chapter and then I just stopped. And I continued and wrote all of Joe's, and then I came back, wrote all of Ruthie's, and then I puzzled them back together at the end.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's amazing.
Yeah, it was an interesting process. And I was like, you heard voices? So I was like, not I didn't hear voices, but you know what I mean? Like, there was just something missing. There was something lacking. And I had outlined it
Yeah.
all as Joe. So obviously my outline didn't work really well. And she just had a voice to tell. And I think I put a lot of my insecurities into her too, about just identification, like, who am I? Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so it was very therapeutic writing Norma slash.
on that
Well,
note,
thank you so much.
how much rewriting was there then to meld the two of them together?
There was a bit.
With Joe
Yeah.
done.
Yeah, because I wanted it to go Joe Ruthie. So then I was like, oh, that doesn't match up. What am I gonna do there? And I was terrible. I just wrote from the heart. So at one point, so everybody knows, I think if you've read it, that Ruthie is actually 2 years younger than Joe. But halfway through the book, she's 10 years older than Joe because I got my timelines mixed up because I was just writing. So I had to go back and create detail. My editor was like, I need you to read all of your stuff and go back and write timelines because none of this is working. So I had to go back and write detailed timelines and make sure everything matched up and make sure they each had a corresponding chapter. Had to make sure that Joe's chapters ended. Well, both of them, they had to end so that you want to come back to them. So yeah, that was a challenge. I'm sorry, this is the other beast that has decided to make his known.
I need to be on camera as well. I need to be on camera if you're going to be.
Well, thank you very much. I really did enjoy your book. I hope you're going to write something else because I'm looking forward to that. And I hope you have a great career and thank you for a wonderful story.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for reading it and considering it.
It was wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks, Debbie, as always. And now Shelley Victor from Delray Beach, Florida, is going to join us. She's also been with us in the past, and she's got a question as well.
Hi, Amanda. I love the book, as many have, and I actually read it twice. It was
Oh, wow.
really well. I had read it first, and I read half the book, and then I was reading it for another book club, and I went back and I started from the beginning, and I just found it all that much richer the second time around. And I do want to thank you for writing about that the book was about an Indigenous people, because I think that's so important for people to be reading. A lot of people know very little, and I think it is important for people to know more. So thank you for that. My two questions were one is about June, and I liked June all along, up until the point that she told I'm going to use Ruthie that about the kidnapping, so I wanted to know what do you think her responsibility was in the kidnapping, and was she complicit in breaking the law?
This is where I left it deliberately vague because I wanted people to come up with their own conclusions, right? Because that's what I like to do. But if you're asking me what I think, I will give you my interpretation, is that I think she loved her sister. I think she loved her sister so much and she saw what her sister was going through. And she came into the situation like a month or so later and she just justified it to herself. You know how we can sometimes justify things that we know we're like, oh, that's not right, but I'm going to justify it. I think she did that because of love of her sister. And it was a different time. I think in the 60s, there wasn't as much concern over a brown child missing. Do you know what I'm saying?
Right.
So that, and she may have thought, oh, well, of course they abandoned this child. I'm glad my sister, I don't know. I'm just thinking outside of what I actually wrote, but I'm really interested in what other people think about that situation as well. But in my opinion, it was done out of a love for her sister, but also a love for the child, because as we know, in a very ironic way, Lenore took a child and then couldn't love her the way she wanted to because she was afraid of her being taken. Right? How messed up is
Right.
that?
Right.
So Ruthie needed somebody to be there to love her, to hold her special. Does that answer
And actually, thank you. My second question is you sort of answered my second question. I said, or I'm asking, like, what role do you think culture played in this kidnapping, given that Ruthie was an Indigenous child?
Yeah, so as we know, especially here in Canada, and I think more so now in the US, about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. I was in Winnipeg yesterday, which is the kind of the heart of that situation in Canada. And it was a thing. And there was a thing in Canada called the 60s Scoop, where Indigenous children were taken from their families and adopted into white families for no other reason than the families couldn't take care of them, which was basically due to neglect. Sorry, I have a cat tail coming up into my mouth right now, which is generally due to neglect, which in essence is poverty, which was created by the government itself. So there's this whole idea back in the 60s that it was okay to do that, that you could adopt an Indigenous child and you would be giving them a better life. So I think if back then Lenore could have convinced herself that that was a thing, when in reality it wasn't. Ruthie had a loving family. She had a caring family. She had a hardworking family. But back then, and even sometimes today, unfortunately, that's still a reality.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's
That in the sense that probably the same amount of money or effort put into looking for her was not the same as if it was like a child from a white family and they were wealthy and they had monies in order to again find the child.
all
But
you have to do in Canada and the US is watch the news, and
wow,
it is a thing, right? Because if a child of color goes missing, it doesn't make the news, right? But if a blonde hair, blue eyed child goes missing, no offense to blonde hair, blue eyed people, my sister is one of them. Um, it's a big deal, and it's really sad. It's really sad that that's still the way it happens. And I'm hoping if people can see that in this book, that that starts a conversation about how wrong this is.
right,
Yeah.
right. Well, then that's, and again, that's, I think that's why I asked the question, because it is something to discuss at a book club. You know, when you're sitting around and discussing, you know, it's not, it's a side story. It's something else that can spring other conversations.
Mhm.
So,
Yes.
all
And
right. Well,
I'm glad that it has. I'm really pleased that it has started those conversations, even here in Canada as well. So yay.
well, thank you very much. And it was, again, excellent book. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
for your question.
Shelley. Appreciate it. You know, I have a question. Were there Indian schools, this is going to sound really naive, folks, in Canada the same way there were in the United States?
We call them residential schools. And
Okay.
yeah, the last one closed in 1996.
Wow. Yeah.
I was 19 years old. Like, that is insane to me. We had one here in Nova Scotia called the Shubenacadie Residential School. But yes, they were in existence from about the 1850s up until 1996. The last one closed here in Canada. And for day schools, which were federally run Indian schools, they didn't close until, well, I have a friend who's my age who went to one, and I'm 47. So
Yeah.
yes, they've existed for a very long time, mostly run by funded by the federal government and run by the church. Yeah.
Federal government and church. Yeah. You know, it was so interesting because they're two different countries. The same thing was going on. The same kind of prejudice was happening. The same things were evolving. And, you know, I've been watching a number of the shows on Netflix about the indigenous women who are kidnapped. And it's usually along the interstate highways and you're
Yes.
gone. And
Yes.
there are so many of them and they're very well done. But you realize the depth of the problem even today of what's going on with women, I mean, teenagers, people in their early 20s, they're just vanished out of the rest area, gone.
In Canada, we have the Highway of Tears, it's called, in British Columbia. And it's a highway that goes north to south, south to north. And for years, Indigenous girls were going missing along that highway, and no one paid attention. And then a non-Indigenous girl went missing, and it blew up in the media. And suddenly there was a documentary about all these missing women. I'm like, they've been missing for 20 years now. And actually, I have a short story collection coming out called Waiting for the Long Night Moon. It'll be out in the US in January, I believe.
I think
It
your
was,
publisher just chatted February, but
oh,
let's
February.
see.
Okay.
I think
My
it's February. We'll
publisher
see.
just,
I'll have her jump back in the chat. She's here.
oh, okay.
The
Hello.
publicist is here. Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, so, and there's a story similar to that. Just investigating like the fact that Indigenous women go missing, and it just doesn't seem to matter. And
People
it
are
really,
asking for the missing women, is it sex trafficking or is it something else?
yes, it's all
Yes.
things. It is. There was recently in Manitoba here in Canada just about a month and a half ago, a man who was sentenced to life in prison because he murdered four Indigenous women and threw their bodies into a landfill. And people didn't even notice they were missing.
Wow.
Like it's just, but he's now been now he's now in prison now. So thank goodness.
Fantastic. Wow. Well, Barbara Powell from Toronto, Ontario, has this question. I would like to know why you didn't say anything about kidnapping and the legal consequences. And was it a kidnapping? I guess it starts out with they didn't
Yeah.
think they were kidnapping, they thought they were helping.
Yeah, and there were no legal consequences because nobody would help the family in Maine. right?
Yeah.
It's funny because well, we have this conversation with some my fellow Indigenous friends who've read the book and stuff, and I get a question sometimes is that why didn't the police help more? And my Indigenous friends are like, we would never ask that because we know the police would never help.
Right, right, right.
Right? In the 1960s, the police were not going to help an Indigenous migrant family from Nova Scotia. They just weren't going to do that. And that's kind of like a well-known fact in Indigenous circles. So I don't think there would have been legal consequences
Yeah.
because they couldn't find their daughter. They stayed there and they called out her name and they kept going back and they kept going back and they couldn't find her. And they just held out hope, but they knew that no one was going to help them.
Yeah. I
Imagine how.
remember growing up during that time too. It's like, you're growing up, then you're kind of free of all the places you went. I mean,
Mhm.
now, if you're 4 years old, you know to stand on top of the tree stump and scream. Like, like what to do. At the time, that didn't happen. We wandered. Like, we would play under the Garden State Parkway by going, like the cars would be going above us because we thought that was so cool to be able to do. And nobody knew where we were. It's not like they were like out there going, gee, they're under the Garden State Parkway. Let's go get them. No, you came up when the streetlights came on. That's what you did.
Oh
So,
yeah. Same way. We had a little bridge and there's a little river and there was a bridge and we would walk the square. I was from this place called Melbourne Square and it was literally a square 2 kilometers around. And we would say, we're gonna go walk the square when we were like 9, 10 years old. And my grandma and my mom would always say, don't go under the bridge. Guess where the first place we went was?
it's under the bridge.
Under the bridge to put our
Right.
feet in water, to like, yeah, just to hang out there. So
But
it
now,
was
if you're 4, you're trained to like practically whistle. You probably have a dog whistle or something to start screaming at people. Don't take me. It just,
yeah. How terrifying is that?
I know it's so terrifying. It's like, yeah, it's totally different way, totally different way. And now we're going to go to some audience questions. Tom Donadio, our fabulous editorial director, will be our voice of God on this. So, Tom, are you there, voice of God?
Yes, the voice of God is here, and we do have some really good questions. So first, from Carol, for me, you created a spot-on tension inside of me. How was it for you writing Norma's voice?
Ooh, that's a really good question. So like I said, Norma wasn't originally supposed to be in the book. She was first chapter, she goes missing. Last chapter, she shows up. And then she just started speaking to me. And I think writing her was actually quite therapeutic for me. I am what's called in Canada and probably the US white passing. So I don't look
Hmm.
indigenous unless you know who my family is. So I've always kind of struggled with my identity, like where do I belong? That's the big question. Where do I belong? And Norma always wonders, where do I belong? So I think the poor character, I took all of my stuff going on in my head and I planted it on this poor character. So I feel like she's a part of me. And it was very therapeutic writing Norma. Once I got into it, once I realized that she wanted her story told, I was like, okay, this is very therapeutic of me because I wanted to tell her story because it was kind of a way for me to acknowledge my own Indigenous self and become a better Indigenous woman. Not a better Indigenous woman, but like more comfortable in myself so that I can help my community.
Hmm.
That makes sense?
Hmm.
No.
Being more informed, being more
Yeah,
informed. Yeah, being more
yeah.
informed. You can't help people if you're not informed about what is going on, what's with the culture or whatever.
Mhm.
There's no way you can just sit there and jump in. It doesn't work like that.
True story.
Chantel asks, I would love to know what Amanda would have written about Norma's dad, or told us more about him. Why did he just watch everything happen? What's his background?
Mm,
Oh, again, it's one of those things that I didn't think about because it wasn't central to the story, but I'm hoping other people can think about that. So he was a judge, right? You're talking about the adopted dad, I'm assuming. And he watched his wife struggle, right? With all these pregnancy losses and stuff. So when she came home and said this child had been abandoned, then he's just like, okay, here we go. This is a way to make her happy. No one else wanted this child. He didn't know. He wasn't in the car,
mm-mm,
right? You don't know what that conversation was like. And that's the beauty of fiction is that you can anticipate what he might have said, what he might have thought.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what he might have thought and never said.
also what yes, exactly. He may have been like, but my wife seems to be happy.
Right,
I'm going to tell myself that this child was abandoned
right.
and that we are doing better for this child than she ever would have been. Like I said, we can convince ourselves of the craziest things sometimes.
Hmm.
While we're on the subject, an anonymous attendee says, a judge is a fairly public position. How did moving to a neighboring town give him the anonymity that no one would notice or ask about his new daughter?
People just weren't that nosy, I guess. These are questions I've never even thought about. Again, it's in the realm of that wasn't what I was trying to talk about.
Hmm.
So it's up to the reader to delve into that themselves and to think about how would a judge do that? That's a conversation you have. I guess this is why it's popular in book clubs. Right? I'm just like coming to this now a year and a half later. So I guess that's why it's popular in book clubs because you can have these conversations. But again, he's going to do everything in his power to please his wife to make sure that this works for her, and he convinces himself that this child didn't have a family, so it all works out for them. And yes, I saw that one. I'm not paying attention, chat, but I saw that one. People often believe they're above the law,
Hmm.
especially especially people who are not of color often believe they're above the law.
Hmm.
People of color fear the law. So yeah,
Also, during that time, you were far enough, like if you moved two towns over, you didn't know each other's worlds quite the same way. It's
yeah.
not like what we have now. You shopped in your town. Like I was thinking
Mm.
about this when I was younger. Like you shopped here. It's not like you went to like malls. A lot of malls didn't even exist at that time. Like place was such a different thing. Place was your town and maybe the next town over, and that was it. And if you knew people that were at someplace that was far away, even if it was a half hour away, it was
Oh,
far away. Am I
I
making
remember,
sense?
yeah, I remember being a child, and Halifax for my family is an hour and 20 minutes away, and that's the big city. And it's not a big city. It's a beautiful city, but it's not big. And
Mhm.
that required weeks of planning if someone had a specialist report appointment, because who could drive that far? Because people didn't drive that far, right? Who could navigate that city because there's so much traffic? We in my little community, we had three churches. There was a little store where everybody shopped, and there was a gas station.
Mhm.
People only went to town when they needed really important groceries or to pay their bills at the bank. Like it was very small. Life was very isolated, insulated back then. And that's just me in the 80s. So imagine in the 60s.
In the 60s, a second car became a really big deal. It's one of
Oh,
the reasons the economy changed so much is in the late 50s, early 60s, you got a second car so that your wife didn't have to go shopping on just Thursday. They could go when they want. It's very interesting when you sit and listen to like, the stories of what happened then. And I think that we have to put ourselves, it's almost like you want to read like or look at pictures of what streets in the 60s look like and what the culture is like because I'm still 27, but I do remember that.
yeah. That's funny because I teach right now, and I tell my students all the time it's important to understand the context of the story we're reading.
Mhm.
When was it written? I said we did poetry today. I was like Shakespeare's sonnets are not necessarily going to be accepted the way they were when they were back then. I said, and stories are reflective of their time.
Right.
So you have to really understand when they were written because a story that was written maybe in the 1920s, you're not going to get it now unless you knew it was written in the 1920s. So I think that kind of plays into it. It's just a different time. And you're right. There was no social media. There
No.
was, I remember being younger and you looked up, we looked up the tide times because we have the Bay of Fundy, which is the high tides in the world. We would look up the tide times and the weather in the newspaper when it came in the morning, right?
Right.
So you know when you could go to the beach and when you couldn't. You know if it was going to be sunny when it wasn't. So, and the even the TV guide was in there.
Yeah, it was like everything was in one place. There was one place where you went and it was limited. There were three channels. There was like, and then, something else, cartoons on the weekend and stuff like. But it was everything was very methodical compared
Very,
to now. So you see when you're looking at the story, how people could have gotten away with things because you could have just made something up and you could
yeah.
have said she was your sister's child and nobody would have like, known.
Exactly. I know that here's a little bit of family secret on my
Right.
part, but my oldest aunt had a few children that no one knew about. And because she had moved away a little bit, not far, but a little bit. And now we're just reconnecting with them now and their
Right.
children. So that was something we should have known, but no one really did,
Well,
right?
wasn't there that she gets tan at the beach and they said there was some Italian blood? I got a big kick out of that. It's like that's
Yeah,
what she tans and no one else does in the family. It was a good
yeah.
line.
Hmm. And when
So
you're young, you're gonna believe that.
yeah, totally, totally. Tom, you have another question? We're yapping here.
Yes. So we have a question from another anonymous attendee. We don't know what type of counselor or therapist Alice was, but rather than deceive Norma, why didn't she tell her that she was adopted to help her understand her quote unquote dreams and move past them?
I don't think it's within the purview of a psychologist or psychiatrist to tell a child that they're adopted. I think that would be violating their oath. I mean, it is now, because they're underage and it's their parents. But I don't think she just knew that she was adopted. There was no, in her mind, there was no deception there. She didn't know that she had been stolen. So, um, in her mind, it was up to the parents to eventually to say to the child that you've been adopted, and it was not her business to do that. She was just there to provide comfort and a way of navigating this world, I think.
Hmm.
That makes sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, absolutely. Question from Francis. The kidnapping of Ruthie resulted in not only grief, but guilt that held many of the characters hostage and prevented them from leading productive and happy lives. Do you think that a family undergoing this tragedy can ever reconcile these feelings of grief and especially guilt to move forward with their lives?
I think so. I think this family actually did that, but they had to get Ruthie back for that to happen. Um, um, they did move on as best you can when you have a child missing. I've never experienced this, so I can't speak to it from like a psychological point of view. I'm just speaking to a fictional point of view. But they did move on, always with her in the back of their mind, always with them wanting to get her back, and the mother somehow knowing. I've heard this said that mothers just know, right? Mothers know when their child is in trouble. I don't know. My babies are four-legged and covered in fur. So I don't really understand it on that level. But oh, now I've lost my train of thought completely. This is what happens when you're very jet lagged.
You are jet lagged. You said that. You promised. You said that to
Yeah.
us up front. You're not acting it, but you said that.
Yeah, sorry. I've been like all like the West Coast to like the middle yesterday. I woke up in Winnipeg yesterday and now I'm in Nova Scotia. That's like five time zones, so I'm a little bit confused. So I actually forgot my train of thought. So you're gonna have to tell me the question again, Tom.
Oh, yes. Wait, sorry, let me get there again. Oh, you do think that a family undergoing this tragedy can never reconcile these feelings of grief and especially guilt to move forward with their lives?
Right. And I think they did to an extent, but they always had Ruthie in the back of their mind. I don't know how it works in real life. Like again, I write fiction. I'm not a psychologist, so I wouldn't attempt to answer that question in real life, because I don't have that knowledge. But in fiction, they attempted to move on. They attempted it, but they never really could fully, right? Joe left his family. He left completely, after what he had done, which was a despicable thing that he did to protect his family because he thought that's the only thing he could do. We all react to these things in different ways, but I wouldn't want to answer that intelligently because it is a work of fiction. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? That's a
Right.
very in-depth question that I fear I might answer inappropriately.
Okay, a question from Mary. I really enjoyed the novel and all the characters. Thank you. I especially liked how you wrote a minor character whose name wasn't revealed, but who had two very meaningful exchanges with Joe. She lived in the grasslands in the beautifully painted house, which he later recreated. Those short scenes had an almost magic realism or spiritual feel. Was she a goddess or just a benevolent, wise stranger?
Yes.
All of the above.
All of the above. I've been asked this before. Is she a ghost? Is she real? And I say yes. Because
Whatever
again,
you want her to be.
yeah, everybody has their own beautiful interpretation. And I wouldn't want to ruin that for anybody. And
Mhm.
I have my own opinions, but I just want the reader to dwell in that, and to consider that. So that's a very
That's a great
lovely
answer.
question, Mary, I think it was. But yeah, I'm just gonna leave that one for you.
It's a good book club question of ask the group. What do you
It is a
feel?
thing.
What do you
Yeah.
feel what's going on? And just to see how people came to a story and what they walked away from. I think it's very interesting. Because
Yeah.
sometimes when you get together with a book group, I always say one of the exciting things is it's a book you read by yourself and you have
Hmm.
your own interpretations. And until you talk to somebody about that book, it's all you. And then you hear what other people say and go, I never saw that happening. I didn't see that at all.
And
And
I
it's what
wrote it.
happens with you.
And
Yeah.
I wrote it and I don't see those things. Some of those things I know I did on purpose, but also I don't know. I don't like a book that lays everything out for me.
Hmm.
I want to be able to imagine for myself. I want to be able to think about it, and the best books for me are ones that just stick in my brain, like what was going on? Like I love that. So I think I may have unconsciously did that on purpose to just make the reader consider a little bit more.
Yeah. See what happened.
Well, that's
Yeah.
part of what makes the book so popular with book groups is you're able to have those discussions and have things
Hmm.
open to interpretation. So it could really,
It's
result in
really fun.
a
It's
really
really
good book.
fun for me to hear some of those interpretations of what people think. And the woman in the grasslands is quite a common one. Is she real? Is she a ghost? Is she a spirit? Is she a goddess, as Mary said? And I every single time I get asked that question, I just answer, yep.
Hmm.
Right. Um, Candy asks, Joe is clearly a man suffering from PTSD from his childhood trauma of losing his sister. Do you believe that today there might be help for him, which he didn't get, or is that still a serious health problem facing Indigenous people?
You guys are all about the psychology, and I do not have a psychology degree. But I think there are services available. Obviously, at times they are not culturally safe for Indigenous people. So Indigenous people have different ways of processing things, and like perhaps they want to participate in a lodge, a sweat lodge, or participate in ceremony as a way of dealing. Um, Sometimes non-Indigenous therapies can be actually more damaging. So I think with the right person and the right frame of mind, there will be help for that person. But in the mainstream medical system, I don't think we're there yet. And I used to work in Indigenous health policy for years. So this is something I was on our child and youth committee. I was on our mental health committee here in Atlantic, Canada. So these are things I've talked about a lot, but I don't think we're there yet. I do know that there are some physicians out there that are now prescribing a sweat or prescribing sitting with an elder and talking as ways. I'm not saying that those work for everybody, but sometimes they do work. So I think there's more opportunity now for him that he would have had to take care of himself and get well. I don't think we're there yet as a society when it comes to people of color and how to properly acknowledge the trauma and assist with it. But we're getting there.
And I think more so women reach out and then we'll see it as something bad that they can't do this. So instead, they can either hide it or walk away. It's
And
one or
that's
the
all
other.
cultures. That's men in all cultures,
Yes,
right?
exactly. Yeah,
Right?
it's
That
men in
just
all
is,
cultures. That's,
yeah.
just what happens.
Which is unfortunate because men feel, women
Hmm.
feel like they should feel that they can go somewhere and get help for what they're suffering from, and I wish they would.
Hmm. Exactly.
Vicky says, I loved the ending that Ruthie lived and found her family. Did you know ahead of time that you would resolve the story in such a believable and poignant way?
Yeah, as soon as I knew that Ruthie was going to be part of the story, I knew exactly how it was going to end. It was like it just went boom. Okay, now that she's here, I know how it's going to end. I knew he was going to the Joe. No spoilers, because she said at the beginning that
I
we're allowed.
said,
Yeah.
read the book. We got to read the book.
So I knew that from the very beginning that Joe was going to die, but I needed it to be obviously passing into the spirit world is not like a joyous occasion, but I wanted to be something that he appreciated. Like in the book, it says he says, I know it may sound crazy, but this is one of the happiest moments of my life because everybody he loved was in the room with him.
Hmm.
He had never experienced that before. So that was kind of where I was going. But then once Ruthie had a story, I was like, well, she can carry on with him. And at the end, she's with her niece who looks a little bit like her, and she's never experienced that before, right? So
Right.
she's with her niece, Joe's daughter, at the cabin where her and her brother were last happy together. And it made me feel good ending it that way.
Yeah. Something uplifting.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Rebecca says, Ruthie's mother lives to see her daughter return home, but not Ruthie's father, making me think that Ruthie reuniting with her mother was particularly important to you. Am I right? And why?
Uh, no, I don't think so. I think it's just that life goes on and people pass at unfortunate times. Um, I didn't want this to be a perfect novel where every character was perfect, every timing was perfect. Um, I don't know. I knew that it would just be too tied in a bow, I guess, if they both got to meet her in the end. And there has to be something, and I wanted Joe to experience something. It was more about Joe, right? In the beginning, when I said that I written about Joe, so that his dad passes away and he doesn't go home for the funeral. So that was written first, and I just kind of incorporated Ruthie's um not meeting her dad. Well, not meeting her dad after she met him from 0 to 4. Afterwards as part of that, puzzling it together. But I think it was more well, just things don't happen that way. Things are not neat and tidy. Life is not neat and tidy.
Right.
And sometimes we lose people before we want to, and that's sometimes what happens. Ooh, sorry, my dog is about to tip over my computer. I'm good.
Averted disaster.
Yeah.
Amy would like to know if you're in touch with your father's siblings and do they have a closer connection to the indigenous culture?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I have tons of aunties and uncles. They live about 10 minutes that way. I would say 10 minutes that way, like you guys know. But my reservation is about 10 minutes in that direction from my house. And a lot of my aunties live there. Some of them don't. Some of them have passed, obviously. My aunties and uncles have passed. But yes, I used to work on my reserve as well, so I was always around them. And we are a big family, so I have cousins everywhere. And we talk all the time. So yeah, we're quite not super close. I think this is the issue is that children are always closer to their mother's family, right? So I'm very close to my mom's family, but I am close to my dad's family, particularly my dad, my stepmom, my brother, and my sister, and I have a new 6-month-old niece, 6-month-old tomorrow, and she is
Oh,
the most
Um,
beautiful thing in the world, no lie.
oh,
Um, so yeah, I'm very close to all my family, and I feel very grateful for that. When I wrote The Berry Pickers, a lot of time in the beginning, people are like, "Do you like your mother?" So I told my mom this. I picked her up one day, took her grocery shopping, and I was like, "Mom, people are asking me if we get along." And she's like, "Well, we have our moments," and we do.
I love that.
But I love my mom, and I have a stepmom who's been my stepmom. I'm 47. She's been my stepmom for 42 years. So I don't know my life without her, and she is fabulous. So I have two amazing moms. So yeah, this is fiction. Try to keep telling people this is fiction, but yeah, I do love my moms and my dad. So yeah,
Yeah.
and my brothers and sisters. There's 3 sisters and a brother there. So
let's see. And April says, I loved, in all caps, loved The Berry Pickers. I'm involved in several book clubs in Las Vegas and have made this story a recommendation as it is so well written and fosters great discussion. Now, this was something that was brought up right before our discussion, so I'm glad that someone asked it. My question is, are there any future TV or movie deals on the
Mm.
horizon?
ooh, I'm contractually obligated to. So I am co-writing a screenplay.
Wow.
Yep, with an indigenous screenwriter out of California. And that's all I'm allowed to say about that.
Okay.
Except it hasn't been picked up. Don't get all excited. No one's bought it or anything, but there has been a little bit of interest, and we got together, and we are co-writing it, and we're having a lot of fun with that. It's a very difficult medium, though. It's
Hmm.
very different. The writing is very different, and I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot, and I still have a tons more to learn. But yeah, so there's things in the works, so she said.
Yeah. It's funny because when you screenwrite, you don't put certain things on the page.
Oh no.
put in, out, move here, move here. And it's amazing. I have to tell everybody what to do. It's like I
Yeah.
tell everybody what to do, where to move. How about the
Yeah.
words? And the words are like here, and but there's a lot of direction.
Yes, and it is. And the words, so in my mind, when I started writing this, like my portions of it, I was trying to copy and paste dialogue from the book. Doesn't work. When you read, dialogue works a certain way. When you listen and watch, dialogue works a different way. So it didn't work. And I just like, okay, so that first one's going into the fire because that did not work. So yeah, there's a lot of editing that's going to be happening with that. But yeah, there's things in the works. Like I said, no one's bought it, no one's picked it up, but there has been a little bit of interest.
Well, one of my friends who wrote a lot for TV said he came in and only wrote the chase scenes, and somebody else only did this part. So it's sort of like you're building a house, and some
Oh,
people are just painting the woodwork, and some people are doing the walls, and some people are doing the parts that have to go faster because
mhm.
that's what they do. And it's
Yeah,
like that's what they're able to do. And the task of writing it, even just what you're doing right now, is making you rethink it because it's not going to be the same. It
it
has to
won't be the same.
play.
And if you're one of those people like me who reads the book, then watches the movie and goes, ugh, that was not the same. That was so terrible. I am throwing out a blanket apology to all screenwriters everywhere
Yeah.
because they cannot be the same. If I was going to write a screenplay to the truth, the 100% truth to the Berry Pickers, it would be like 25 hours long, and nobody wants to sit in a theater for 25 hours
Yeah.
long. Someone's gonna have to go pee. So there has to be things that are different, and it's very interesting. It's a very interesting experience to try to take a first person narrative like this and put it into a visual format. It's very interesting.
What's interesting too is I hear a lot from people who are making films that you can't have too many locations these days. Like they don't want that. So when you
Right.
think about it, we were talking about this just before. It's you have the one place and you have here. And
Yep.
where else do you need? Like how many other places do you need? And that's huge right now because I remember I was talking with somebody who was a screenwriter and looking for material one day. They were in my office. And I said to them, what about this? And they were really funny. And they said, that's way too big. Like we're not going to do that. That is
Yeah.
many sets. And I was like, never thought about that. But we were talking before, it's like, oh, you have this place and this
Mhm.
place and another place.
Yeah, we only have three places in this book, right? The Annapolis
Right,
Valley, Nova Scotia, the Berry Fields of Maine, and Boston.
right.
So that's the it doesn't go too far from those things. And FYI, we got really good tax credits for movie making in Nova Scotia. A lot of Hallmark movies are made here. The new Stephen King was just filmed right over here by my gas station across the road.
Hmm.
I was so sneaking out the window watching
Yeah.
it.
That's so cool.
Any tips, folks?
Yeah.
Well, good luck with the project. Hope
Yeah.
hope
Thanks.
hope all goes
Yeah.
well with that
It's
as the
it's very
process goes on.
exciting. It's very exciting. The idea of it is very exciting anyway. Yeah.
Absolutely. April says, I'm a huge fan of Louise Erdrich and wondering if you are as well.
Of course, yes. My favorite is La Rose. I don't know what yours is, but my favorite Louise Erdrich is definitely La Rose. I just absolutely like, oh, I just love it. I think it's beautiful. I've read quite a few of hers, but that's the one that sticks out in my head as my fave. My mom, she's like, not my fave. I'm like, well, it doesn't have to be, Mom. We have different ideas, but it's my favorite Louise for sure. I haven't read a new one yet though, because right now I teach and I'm reading for teaching purposes and stuff. So at Christmas, I have a list started for when, as soon as I'm done marking my last paper at Christmas, I have like 6 books on my list. I'm like, I'm ready to go. And that's one of them.
That's perfect.
What are
What are
you
some of the
teaching?
others?
What are you teaching right now?
Right now, currently, I just teach reading and writing critically, which is a first year English class in the university that every student has to take to teach
Wow.
people how to think critically, how to read critically, how to do close reading and stuff like that. So I'm teaching that now. And next semester, I'm teaching creative writing workshop and introduction to Indigenous literatures. Mm.
Nice.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And what are some of the other books on your holiday list?
Ooh, Jane Urquhart. So Americans may not know if you're a Jane Urquhart fan, put it up in the chat. So she's like one of my favorite writers of all time. So she just came out with a new book, so I'm really excited to read that. I have it. I like pre-ordered it, the whole deal. But I have it sitting ready to go at Christmas. What else do I have? I have The Lost Journals of Sacagawea, which I haven't got to. I'm really excited to read that. Um, Oh, there's so many. I'm trying to read the Jeff Vandermeer series, the Annihilation series, because my honor student is interested in that. So I'm working. I want to read that so I can understand what they're doing. I didn't think I would enjoy it. Turns out I enjoy it. I'm reading Paul Lynch, A Prophet of Song right now. I read just a bunch of different things all at once. I'm reading here in Canada. I was on a panel this last weekend in Vancouver, which is the very opposite of the country. So that's why I'm a little bit crazy in my head right now. But I was on a panel with Connor Kerr, who wrote Prairie Edge. So I'm listening to that one right now. Really brilliant. So there's just so many. There's so many books, right? You guys all know you're all readers. There's just so many books and not enough time to read all the brilliant things that you want to read. So I did have knee surgery in May and I was laid up for 2 weeks. And the very first week I wasn't allowed to move at all. And I read 8 books in 7 days.
Mm.
And it was joyful. It was joyful.
Now, if you asked about the other knee, how's the other knee? I don't think I might need that done too.
Yeah, right. It's not sore, but maybe I want to read a little bit. So yeah.
It's fabulous.
I see
Anything else?
Jane Urquhart fan, so I'm pretty excited about that. Yay.
Let's see, and a couple more questions. Tony asks, are all berries still picked manually? Is there any machinery to accomplish this task today?
I'm not sure. I know that there's still a lot of migrant workers. They're not Mi'kmaq necessarily. There are still Mi'kmaq who go down there, but they're predominantly Mexican, I believe, is what I've heard. And I don't know if they still use the hand rakes, but there's still a lot of them. They have nice cabins there now. In a full circle moment, my dad and I, when my American launch happened for the berry pickers in Portland, Maine, we drove down through the berry fields again, and we went through a different way, and there was a whole bunch of cabins and stuff there for folks to stay in now. So I'm not exactly sure, but I think they still do a lot of it manually.
Oh.
Mm.
And
Night Watchman was a great read, Denise. I agree.
and finally from Tony, will you write any of the other berry picker stories that you have heard?
I I always say no. But the creative gods do what they do, right? So I say no now, but in 5 years from now, who knows? I may be inspired by another story and I may continue on. A lot of people want me to tell the parents' story, like Joe and Ruthie's parents. They want to know that, like a prequel. Some people are like, "Are you going to write Ruthie now into the future?" It's like, no, in my head, these characters are settled. That story is done. But I can't say that that's always going to be the case. And like I said, in 5 years from now, I may be like, oh, May wants to tell her story, right? Maybe May has a whole entire brilliant story that we haven't heard. But at this time, right now, I have no intention of writing more about the berry pickers necessarily.
Do you have another
Amanda,
one?
thank you so much for answering all of those questions.
I hope I answered them well. Like I said, I'm
You
super
absolutely did.
tired. And I'm like,
I don't want you to see. Tell us what's next, though. Come on, tell us what's coming out in February because I
oh
want
yeah.
to hear. What it's a collection
Oh,
of short stories.
it is. I only have, for some reason, the Canadian version here by my desk, but it's called Waiting for the Long Night Moon. The American cover is quite beautiful, but I don't have one here. Sorry. It's in my office. It's purple. But yeah, it's called Waiting for the Long Night Moon. And it's a collection of short stories about the Indigenous experience, from pre-contact to right up to the present time. I think it's 17 stories. Some of them are super short, some of them are longer. Just today, Booklist gave it a starred review.
Yay!
So I
Yay.
was very like, oh, like I still get so excited about this stuff, right? Because I'm not
Good. You should get
sure.
excited.
Yeah, so I'm pretty excited about it, but it does come out after Christmas in the US. Here in Canada. It made Indigo, which is our Barnes and Nobles
Sure.
Indigo chapters here. It made the top 100 books of 2024, so I was pretty happy about that. Yeah, so it's getting some recognition, and I'm pretty pleased with it. And it's funny because I wrote them before the Berry Pickers, so you'll get to see me as I learn to be a writer.
And you never know. Another book of short stories, you might have a short story from this book, from some of these characters. It may not be a whole book, it might be a story. It might be a novella. It might be something, a short, you know?
That like I said, the creative gods, whatever happens, happens. And I just
Yeah.
listen. I tell the stories I'm given. So yeah. And a lot of these are based on stories that were gifted to me by various people. One of them came from a dream I had. They're varied, but they're all about the Indigenous experience in Turtle Island, basically.
Well, what we're going to do is we're going to get a book page built for this, Tom. Saying that. We're going to have a book page built for this. And what we'll do is when we send out the video of this and when we post the video and the podcast, we'll make sure we have a link to the next thing because people always want to know what's next.
Mhm.
And we'll be able to do that. So everybody who was here tonight will get a copy of the video. Everybody who signed up gets the video. And we'll make sure we include that so that they're ready to buy and they're ready to, because you've got, fans right here. And I think that'd be really terrific.
That would
So,
be great. Yeah, I hope if you stumble upon it, I hope you enjoy it.
right, right. And there's so many other places. Amanda, thank you for joining us this evening so much. I know everyone in the audience, from reading the comments, people were thrilled that you were here. And
Oh,
people were saying, oh, I've got to be able to go talk about my book club. Somebody wrote something that really mattered a lot. I'm talking about book club next week and feel so much more informed. And I really love that. Talking
oh.
at my library. And, for people who are going to talk about this with your book club, remember you can watch this video with your book club. And it's, hey, look, everyone should have read the book. So all the answers will be there. Thanks for taking the time. I know you are jet lagged. You've been across the country these last couple of days. And I look forward to reading the next book and catching up with you then too.
Okay, thank you so much for having me, and I'm gonna go to bed now.
You're going to go to bed now. And I've got a couple of more announcements from us if everybody wants to stay on while she goes to sleep and hangs out with the pets. Okay.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so
Oh,
much, Amanda.
anytime, So tonight's event will be available on YouTube and on our podcast soon. Our book reporter talks to. So anywhere you get the podcast or anywhere if you sign up on YouTube, if you are a subscriber, you'll always know when our new videos come out. Also, you can sign up for our newsletters. We'll do that in the after as well. We've created a new events page on tbrnetwork.com where you can sign up for all of our programs, which just makes it easier. One-stop shopping. And also, wait, I just have to find out our next Bookaccino live book group will be on December 3rd, Tuesday, December 3rd at 8 o'clock. We'll be talking with Ariel Lawhorn about the Frozen River. And this is a book that many of you have been asking for a discussion about. So we're completely looking forward to this evening as well. On Wednesday, November 13th at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Eastern Time, we're going to be hosting our monthly Bookaccino live book preview event. I'm going to talk about books coming out between November 12th and the end of the year. December doesn't have that many books, folks. And we're going to look ahead to some January and February titles. Sign up for that is now available on bookreporter.com. And on Wednesday, December 11th, we're going to be hosting our Book Reporter reviewers for their annual Best of the Year program. So some of our reviewers will be jumping on to do that. So if you sign up for our events at the Book Report Network newsletter, you'll never miss a program. And we want to thank you all for joining us tonight. Reminder, we have more than 200 Book Reporter author interviews. I'd already interviewed Amanda before this. So if you want to hear more in depth about other aspects of the book, go over there. And thank you all for joining us. It was a really fabulous evening for us. Hope you enjoyed it as well. And we will see you next time for another Bookaccino Live evening. Thank you so much.